You're welcome to the Economy and Politics show designed for robust conversations on economy and policies that impact household livelihoods. I am Ottoabasi Abasiekong. This edition will discuss the policy agenda of the administration of President Bola Tinubu and the prospects for inclusive economic growth. Last week, the Minister of Finance and Coordinating Minister of Economy, Mr. Wale Edun, the Minister of Budget and Economic Planning, His Excellency Atiku Bagudu, and the Chairman of the Presidential Committee on Fiscal Reforms, Mr. Taiwo Idele, engaged the media on the 8-point agenda of President Tinubu and the plans to reposition the Nigerian economy. Since the reforms of the current administration, especially in the removal of fuel subsidy and the liberalization of the foreign exchange markets, the impact has been severe for Nigerians in rising cost of food prices, transportation, and even house rent. Companies have reported FX losses in operations. There is a yearning for the right mix of fiscal and monetary policies to stabilize the economy. Today, we'll be discussing Tinubu's 8-point agenda and inclusive economic growth in Nigeria. I have joining me virtually Dr. Nevin, an economist, and Dr. Afolabi Olowookere, MD and Chief Economist, Analysts, Services, Data, Resources. Gentlemen, welcome to the show.
It's great to be with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Let me begin by asking you, Dr. Nevin, as today marks the period of the 100 days of the Tinubu administration, how do you assess the impact of the two bold reforms in the petroleum downstream sector and the foreign exchange market liberalization on Nigerian households?
Well, I think I was one of those, and of course, PwC, when I was there, we were in favor of unification of the exchange rate. We said to the CBN in 2017, I think, as long as the multiple exchange rates, the economy won't grow. What we said came true, so that was a good move. We were also changed in favor of removal of the fuel subsidy, and I'm personally in favor of it. That was necessary. I think everyone knew it was necessary. So those were two bold reforms. Unfortunately, what's happened at the same time, though, is there's been some real negatives and headwinds on the economy. And the biggest headwind, two biggest headwinds, one is insecurity, which is really affecting food production, so food inflation. And the other one, of course, is the reduction in hydrocarbon production. So, we've got as low as 1.0 million barrels a day. So unfortunately, even though those were the right decisions, Nigerians continue to suffer because of a number of things, but particularly the insecurity and its impact on the economy and food production, and particularly the reduction in hydrocarbon production, which has really created problems for the foreign exchange market.
So the issue of the insecurity, looking at that, recently the Group Managing Director of Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation said that, according to an NPC, that crude oil production is now 1.67 million barrels per day. That's still being debated. But do you see that that proactive step to address this particular area of insecurity when it looks at a major source of revenue, crude oil production?
Well, of course, the insecurity affects the whole country, but there are particular issues around the production, the hydrocarbon production. I think what I do know is the administration is keenly aware that there are real problems created by having oil production get as low as 1 million barrels a day. So I think it was 1 million in May, 1.3 in June, fell back to 1.0. As you said, they've come out and said they think they've got it back up to 1.6 million barrels a day. That would be fantastic news for the country because we all know the challenges we face. And to do it simultaneously, have a situation where we have high oil prices, but only producing 1 million barrels a day creates real problems. So if the group managing director of NNPC is correct and oil production is back in the right direction, I think that's fantastic news. What I do know, as I said, is I know the administration is focused on this and they realize how critical it is to get that production back up to 1.6, 1.7, or even 2. When I arrived in the country 15 years ago, it was over 2. So very critical for our economy. And then I think if that took pressure off the FX exchange rate, we would be able to do these other policies without having all of the things that we know that are going on. We're trying to do the fuel subsidy removal. We're trying to do the FX unification in the middle of having these other challenges. So if the group MD is correct, as I said, and we've got oil production going in the right direction, that's fantastic news for the nation.
Yeah. So very clear, security is very critical at this point for a major revenue earner to achieve stability. We'll come back to that, Dr. Nevin. Thank you for that insight. Now to you, Dr. Afolabi. The warning strike of the Nigerian Labour Congress comes at this period. They've had this deadlock in terms of discussing with the government on the outcome of the removal of fuel subsidy. And the approach is that the manner in which the palliatives are being rolled out, it seems like they're not being carried along. So far, we've seen over 300 billion was announced by the president, and 5 billion has been distributed. Some states have come out to say they received 3 billion. But overall, how would you see the administering of these palliatives? It's very critical at this point to cushion the effect of the petroleum subsidy removal. Do you see that efficiency, that framework that can also effectively engage labor and really, really avoid situations like warning strikes that can shut down the economy?
Okay, thank you once again. I think it's also very important for us to know that following most economic policies, economy is the study of trade-offs.
Yeah.
You try to solve one problem, you probably create another one. And if God helps you, if you don't create multiple ones.
Yes.
Communication can be very important. Engagement can be very important. There can be other approaches that are not totally economic, but they can also be effective in making sure that the effects of economic policies actually achieve their purposes. So if you have something like removal of subsidy, definitely there are, just like a trade policy also, there will always be gains and losses of policies. Anybody that earns fixed income like labor, definitely they have to suffer. Why? Because the salary has not increased for a long time and then prices are increasing. If prices are 24% plus, then that means in 3.5 years, if you do compound interest rates, then that means things are probably doubling. That doesn't mean that you are consuming exactly the same basket that NPS is using to do this computation, but it means that prices are increasing rapidly, but your salaries are not increasing rapidly. So you are a major stakeholder in any government policy, so you should be carried along with this policy. Challenge often is that how do you then carry people along and then ensuring that not only the people that are in organized labor are benefiting from whatever the government is doing. I think that's also very important. There are others who are not employees of government who also have to benefit from whatever the government does. So government sometimes it has a lot of multiple roles to play, and that's why it's called government. It has to know how best to play such roles. So it's expected that labor will talk for this kind of thing because purchasing power has been reduced to a very low level. So now, are this policy important? I think Dr. Nevin said these are very critical things and these are very important things for us to do. However, they can be painful. So how do you now administer anti-pain so that people don't probably die or cry too much?
Yeah.
And things like that. When you look at the palliative, there are issues around how do you want to administer it? Who are you administering it by through? What are the mechanisms on ground? How transparent are these mechanisms are? They're not going to be hijacked by politicians who then use it to settle some places and things like that. There are so many issues. It's always happening in Nigeria. This is not the first time. Remember Shopi. We have been here before. There's nothing we are doing now that we've not done before, and we've been around for some time to what's happening.
So, Dr. Afolabi, I want to ask you, from your own insight and understanding, what will be the best approach to palliatives like this in times when measures are taken that will have huge effects on the households and generality of Nigerians? What kind of real impact palliatives can be taken that will carry along all stakeholders, including labor?
So maybe the first thing is that we need to also do a lot of more analysis. Should we find ourselves in a case where we then have to be talking about palliative? That's a more fundamental question.
Okay.
Palliative is a way of saying we've done it, and should you have done it? Shouldn't we have done it? Then let's find palliative. And another thing is that palliative itself can be something that is temporary. After 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, what happens to you? So as an economy, we then need to be doing things that are more sustainable so that we don't find ourselves in this situation in the next 6 years. So having said that, you can't be doing this kind of palliative without government workers. Something has to be done about their salaries. I mean, it's not a bag of rice and spaghetti and indomie and few thousands of naira that is given to someone that will solve the problem. You then have to see how it can be more inclusive, how it can be more long-term. If you want to do palliative, people benefit in the next few months, but after the few months, are there things on ground that can pick it up from there? Can they get sustainable jobs, decent jobs, and their salary can also rise, and things are very important. And also, very importantly, around them, do they see that everybody's also tightening his belts, government and private sector? So while you do that to the non-labor, you must also do that of labor. It's just like you don't take a patient to the theater and open up the theater before you start looking for some kind of painkiller. So these are some. We need more planning, really, as a country.
More planning is needed. Okay, very clear. Let me come to you, Dr. Andrew. Now, the Tinubu administration has outlined the 8-point agenda that focuses on food security, ending poverty, economic growth and job creation, access to capital, improving security, improving the playing field on which people and particularly companies operate, the rule of law, and fighting corruption. Is this convincing enough from your perspective to get the buy-in of the private sector to achieve a productive economy?
Well, I think from the first day of His Excellency President Tinubu's administration, the private sector, everyone I talk to is cautiously optimistic. I mean, the private sector, have been advocating the elimination of the foil subsidy that happened in the first day. We've been advocating a unification of the exchange rate. That happened, I think, in 2 weeks. So from that viewpoint, people continue to be cautiously optimistic. I mean, I think you mentioned before Taiwo coming in as the chairman of the FIRS committee, Fiscal Reforms Committee. I mean, of course, Taiwo is my brother. We were both at PwC until a couple of months ago on that. And so that was a good move. And one of the things Taiwo taught me is that I think 6 or 7 taxes for the federal government raise about 97% of the revenue. So he always advocated, then I advocated because I learned from Taiwo, let's eliminate the other taxes. So I think that the president, His Excellency, has come out and said we're heading in that direction. So I think those are all positive steps. I think the agenda is right, but a few issues on that. I mean, nothing is going to go forward without insecurity, as we talked about earlier before. The hydrocarbon. I mean, all of the inflation we have that's driven by the weak naira is because we're not making enough hydrocarbons. If we can't solve the insecurity or the theft of oil or the shut-in of oil production, we're not going to be able to fix our economic problems. And similarly, if we can't get security around the country, we're not going to get food production up, and we're going to continue to have inflation. On the ease of doing business, I think my reaction a little bit is, we've heard this before. There was a big fanfare about PABEC. His Excellency, the Vice President in the previous administration, was really very supportive of that. We had an absolutely brilliant woman, Dr. Jamoke, heading up PABEC all those years. But the truth is that despite all her incredible efforts, and her team was fantastic, we didn't make that much progress. So, I mean, we take step forwards on PABEC, but then agencies would come and they would be looking to gain revenue. They would be putting on more burdens onto business, more complexity, overlapping administration from different agencies. So I think the concept is there on the ease of doing business, but the execution we're still a little far away for. And part of course, is the Orange report, which His Excellency President Buhari assented to very late in his, I think, May 2020, never executed before he left. Now, His Excellency President Tinubu has come in and said we're going to implement it, and there can be agencies, duplication that gets eliminated. And he came out very early, for example, and clarified between the upstream and the midstream petroleum sectors and who regulated what. So cautiously optimistic, but a lot more work to do. But the one on the 8-point agenda that I think all Nigerians are watching is corruption on that. And of course, corruption was a big part of the 3 points in His Excellency President Buhari's administration. The country didn't really make progress. I think people are watching to see whether His Excellency President Tinubu is serious about this. And of course, I'm not going to name names, but we're all aware of who was named to the cabinet and some of the issues surrounding some of them. So, is he on a path? He's actually going to tackle corruption. Of course, when I was at PwC, wrote the paper, I think in 2015, that it really kind of analyzed the overall cost of corruption, which is something like a third of the GDP. Not a third that's stolen, but the GDP would be a third bigger if we had the same corruption level, not as Norway, but as Ghana on that. And so the damage to all Nigerians is immense. So I think it's the right 8 points. Let's now see on a few of the points, though, whether they're serious about moving ahead on that. And of course, Nigerians, I mean, the one thing about this administration is the expectations, as His Excellency the President said, are very high. All Nigerians are watching, and he said this to his ministers. So at least that, I think, is progress. People realize that it's important and that the Nigerians expect better governance.
Better governance. Now, you talked about fighting corruption, but I want to follow up with the issue of having strong institutions that ensure that things are done properly. Institutions are very vital to national stability. What would you say to that, especially in the financial and economic space?
Well, I think the Olowookere report is really critical to all of this, because before we optimize how an individual MDA might work, the whole structure has to function. When we have the overlapping jurisdictions, the confusion about who does what, the excess costs of all that. No, even if you had an MDA with the right leadership and the right governance, they want to do the right thing, they would find they were in a system that didn't work. So for me, logically, the first step is the Olowookere report and say, look, we have MDAs in this country that cost Nigerians money, very precious resources, and don't deliver any value. Not only do they not deliver value, they deliver negative value to the Nigerian people because they create confusion in their industry. And again, I'm not going to name individual agencies because it causes debate, but I mean the Olowookere report named the individual agency. So before I would get to the question of the governance of a ministry or the governance of an agency, I would start with the architecture of it, say, let's now prune down. We all understand there's too many agencies. The agencies were created not to serve Nigerian people. The agencies were created as patronage, so someone could be the DG and someone could be in the board, and they could collect the money from that. And if there were opportunities for personal enrichment, that happened in many cases. So we need to move away from that model and actually make sure that every MDA is there for a purpose for the Nigerian people, is structured in the way that's appropriate for it, that the overlap, the way the agencies interact together is clear. And if you go to this ease of doing business, what are the two there are three real complaints from business. One, of course, is things change all the time. One is there's multiple taxations and fees and levies. And the third one is there's overlapping jurisdiction and confusion. So they get told one thing by one agency and another thing by another agency, and the agencies are not coordinated. So for me, starting with that architecture, once we have the architecture in place, then I think people in Nigeria understand the concepts of good governance. I look at the Institute of Directors in Nigeria, fantastic organization. I'm on the board of a company now. Well, I was, of course, on the board of PwC, but just the governance is fantastic. So Nigerians know what to do. So let's get the architecture of the MDAs right. And part of it, too, of course, is the federalism concept. So one of the things I do like about the palliative program is actually the president said, look, we're going to give money to the states. And, I'm sure privately they're saying to themselves, some states are going to do a good job, some states aren't going to do a good job, but it has to happen at the state level. So part of the architecture has to recognize that economic development, inclusive economic development, really has to happen at the state level. So if the federal government tries to do everything, we're just going to end up in another round of failure.
Okay, I really get that point now clearly, that the institution, the need for streamlining is important. So we'll be watching the Tinubu administration to see that bold step of streamlining our MDAs and bringing efficiency, like you said. Very, very insightful thought from you, Dr. Nevin. Now let's get to you, Dr. Afolabi. The capital market is key in supporting Nigeria's economy, especially to areas like the financialization of state-owned corporation and assets. And I know you understand the capital market very well. What are your expectations from the government through the Ministry of Finance Incorporated and other entities like the Bureau of Public Enterprise to really, really work on the opportunities of leveraging the capital market to list key state-owned corporations and assets, and also encourage other major multinationals and companies to come on board the capital market?
Yeah, thank you once again. I just saw a news this morning. I know you've seen it from Saudi Aramco. $50 billion.
Yeah, $50 billion.
You know what $50 billion can do? You know what that can do to Nigeria?
that can take care of our, give us some buffer in our foreign exchange.
It's more than a buffer, the entire foreign exchange.
Yes.
The entire foreign reserve is a fraction of that. We probably are trying to get $3 billion from Africa. And sometimes we do $1 billion Euro bond. It's a ceremony, So if we imagine we have things like that, that would be very useful for us. But you see, sometimes we also should not forget our history. Nigeria, many of the companies that you have on Nigerian Stock Exchange now, many of them were government-owned, were state-owned at the time.
Yes.
There were deliberate attempts in the late 70s and early 90s
Yeah.
And then later, under the democracy, we finally sold all government holdings in some of these companies. So Nigeria actually had companies that was able to list at certain stages of its development.
Yeah.
So now, question is, should we go ahead with that route? Definitely. But we should also be very careful. While we do that, we must make sure that these are also profitable firms, such that, of course, we don't want to put something on the exchange that probably has a lot of problems. People don't even want to buy it. It's not very profitable for them. They are still going to spend money, private capital to even bring them to speed. It's a way that they will be very attractive to investors. And even when you make money, government must always shift the frontier of investment, because in the next 20, 50, 100 years, there must also have been other set of government companies, state-owned enterprises that can also be ripe for privatization or commercialization or even placed on it. So that way you can guarantee that the market will always be vibrant. So one thing that is expected is that definitely government will use the capital market more going forward to source for capital. Mofi is doing a lot of very interesting work, but Mofi will also need to work. I'm sure they do a lot of work with Infrastructure Concession Regulatory Commission, because those ones also have a number of assets that are listed, that are PPP projects. There can be private investors in some of them that are mature can be bought to capital markets and listed, and some of them may not even directly list equity, but they can borrow bonds. So you can actually start from the debt side and gradually move debt side, do securitization, and then gradually move to being equity listed. So government, if this market is going to grow, not just because valuation that prices are rising, if we are going to have more stocks, we need government firms, infrastructure companies. There are many things that governments are currently doing that private sector can do them better. So I think going forward, this government should be able to explore the capital market. We want to do our refineries to be better than the way they used to be. Whatever we can do in that area to bring private investment here. But that doesn't mean that government is selling all. Government will also hold a substantial or something reasonable. I mean, look at Saudi Aramco. It's not that everything is given up to, but government has done a way that it can be managed efficiently. And that talks to Dr. Nevin's point about corruption. So if the level of corruption is low, you will not say, oh, all firms, all state-owned enterprises, government should remove its hand. But when the corruption is very high, you then say, what is it doing with government? So we should do something about our interest, governance, corruption. Then we should be able to have firms that are good, profitable, and get them listed on the stock exchange. Because that also has a lot of other advantages. Labor, people can even be part owners of such firms. Workers in those firms can even be shareholders in those firms. Then that way we can distribute value across. Then we can have higher capitalization ratio for our stock market.
Yes. And the capital market is the genuine place that you can create wealth without the issues of corruption. So I think you've brought it on board, Dr. Afolabi, that yes, the capital market is very critical, but you've brought us to history again, that we must also look at those historical things that affected state-owned corporations that were listed on the market. But of course, let's learn from Saudi Aramco. Let's look at the big companies like the Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation, LNG. Let's look at our own equity as government, and let's look at how we can bring them on board the market and begin to create value. And definitely, that's one step I expect the administration to really take, as we really, really need to raise a lot of funds and to fund the 8-point agenda to really jumpstart growth. It's very critical. Very interesting conversation we've had, but let me just get your final thoughts. And this is in the area of what should be the priority of the Minister of Finance and Coordinating Minister of the Economy, Mr. Waledu. I know he has a lot on his desk and quite a time where we need to reposition the economy for growth and inclusive development and also improve investment inflows. Let me begin with you, Dr. Andrew Nevin. What would you be looking at as priority for the finance minister?
Yeah, no, that's a very good question. So, I mean, I think the two issues I mentioned before have to be the top of his agenda. He needs to be asking the entire administration and the state governors to address insecurity. And I think that Honorable Mr. Ada needs to be very clear. If we don't make progress in insecurity, we will never make progress on the economy. So that plus the hydrocarbon production. And I think those two things give him room to do other things. I mean, all the points he should raise, but I mean, I've particularly talked in the last few years around the importance of the service industry. I mean, if you think about it, I mean, our infrastructure, our cost structure, the way we operate, it makes it quite difficult to export physical goods. but we are competitive in exporting, brain capital and high-end services. So coders, developers, business process outsourcing, call centers. And so Philippines, India have developed big businesses. There's 2 million people in Bangalore that work in that. And the thing about that business is, we only have 10 million people in organized employment across the country, but we have access to the global market via the internet, which is a new thing, and we need to tilt. So that's the third area. And one thing he should not do, I'll just end on this, is let's not start more programs. So what tends to happen is that we identify an issue, and then we have a program, and then the program fails, and it costs Nigerians a lot of money and resources, and the problem's not addressed. So one thing I would really like the Honorable Minister to avoid doing is say, yes, because we all know the problems. There's no point in repeating them. In the last few years at PwC, I'd never repeated bad news because there's nothing new in that. So we all know the problems, but don't react to these problems by trying to create a program that is essentially just a Band-Aid, and then it doesn't work, or it's corrupted, or there's incompetence in it. So, whether we go to mass metering or whether we go to anchor borrower or any number of programs, we found that in the past. So I really implore the Honorable Minister to say, if we're going to address an issue, first, let's do less. I mean, I created with Rufai Oseni and Uma Kaimel and others the concept of self-organizing Nigeria. Nigerians can do a lot on their own, so that you don't have to do a lot as the federal government. So don't come in and create new programs. Create a few interventions that create the room for Nigerians and states and even LGAs to do what's required. So those would be my 4 pieces of advice for the Honorable Minister.
Okay, that's very clear. Dr. Afolabi?
Yeah, I would say, if I was the Deputy Minister, I'm going to say 8 points agenda. What are the key performance indicators? What are my targets? And I'm going to have a very big board inside my office and be tracking them. Because sometimes we do a lot of activities, but we don't move the needle. Then I want to see what are the outcomes of my government policies. Secondly, instead of doing much, that talks to the last speaker's point. There are already pockets of activity, government agencies, coordinating minister of the economy. There are other ministers that also do some other things anyway, maybe at the office of the secretary or budget and planning and the rest. So coordinating probably may not mean doing another one. It may also mean working with those ones that are already doing those things so that we don't duplicate functions of a government. So it can be like asking questions, giving a enabling environment to those who some of those things are already domiciled in their haven. And the last point I would say is that if they are already there, they can be leveraged on, strengthened, harmonized, and well coordinated, not recreated. And I said we also need to do something about now that we've done some short term, we need to start thinking about long term. What happened to our production base? What happened to our civil service in terms of data to be more efficient? And what also happened to our knowledge creation base? That may have to do with education. It may have to do with vocation. But as a country, we need to produce more. Otherwise, we'll probably reduce exports.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Afolabi Olowookere. You've also harped on the need for KPIs. So I hope the Minister of Finance and Coordinating Minister of the Economy will have a big board in his office and put those KPIs, looking at all the ministries that connect. And you said he should be more of a team player working with the ministries. It's not like impeding into other people's, other ministers' roles, but just working with them to see how the whole economic program and plan is coordinated. And also, like you rightly said, the need to invest in productive areas that can unlock our productivity. Human capital is a big area for us, like Dr. Nevin has said, in services. So we need to really unlock those opportunities. And definitely, it's a big moment for us to seize the opportunity to unlock growth and ensure that beyond the Tinubu 8-point agenda, we are hitting the major issues, measuring various areas of performance, and of course, ensuring that we secure our assets and unlock opportunities across sectors. Thank you very much, Dr. Andrew Nevin, an economist and friend of Nigeria, for taking out your time to be part of this program. Thank you very much.
No, it's a great pleasure. Thank you, Otto.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Afolabi Olowookere, MD and Chief Economist, Analyst, data services resources. Thanks for all those analysis you give us, and of course, the work you do. We appreciate you. Thank you very much for the time.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. To our viewers, if you want to get further insight on this conversation, join our website, proshare.co, and also follow the Web TV social media platforms to further engage. Till we come your way again, I am Ottoabasi Abasiekong. Thank you for watching, and bye for now.